We're doing Shimcha Halacha Ches today. We skipped a couple. We're Halacha Ches. And the Halacha says, Kav Shel Tfur Chadasha, Kav Shel Yishana. If you have Kav of Tfur from the new Tfur, Kav means to say is the shear Challah is 5/4 of a Kav. So a Kav is the way we describe it. You have less than a shear. So if you have less than a shear of Tfur from new grain, and Kav Shel Yishana, and a Kav less than a shear of Tfur of a old year, then any mitzvah. Then they're not mitzvah. I'm not going to read you the end of the din. It's actually very negated to this, but not negated to what we're going to talk about today. So we're just going to leave it. So what did the Shulchan say? That if you have two kavim, less than a shear of from one year's produce and less than a shear of another year's produce, they're not mature to make a shear challah. Okay, so sort of like to introduce that, it's a regular rule, a general rule that truma meiser, you can only be mafresh from each year on its own year. That means to say is, if we get watermelon seeds from Eretz Yisrael that grew in the 5th year of Shemitah, then we can only be mafresh from them on themselves. We can't be mafresh from the 5th years on the 4th year of Shemitah, or the 6th years. We can't be mafresh from one year on the other year. Or you have meiser behema. So you count your behemoths by the year that they were born in, and you can't be mafresh from one year on another year. Okay, so in our din, we're talking about here about Challah. So the assumption is that the same thing is for Challah also, which is Challah, as we know, is called Truma. And since it's called Truma, the dinim of Truma and Maisa applies to Challah. And therefore, just like Truma and Maisa can't be mafresh from one year on the other year, so too Challah can't be mafresh from one year on another year. Okay, now we'll get more into the details of that as we go on, but for now we'll take that at face value. Now, the last couple of halachas made it pretty clear that the din of being mafresh from one type on another type, and the din of what could be mitzurif, those dinim are very intertwined. Okay, the things that could be mitzurif to each other, and the things that you could be mafresh from one and the other, those go together. So our din here talks about them being mitzurif, but the same din would be mafresh from one and the other is the same kind of a din. So, if I had grain that grew in this year, it's Tafshin Ayin Hey, and I want to be mafresh from that grain on stuff that grew on Tafshin Ayin Daled, then I would not be allowed to. Okay, that's a pretty.
Well, don't say that.
The Shulchan, so that's why I said the Shulchan doesn't say that. But the reason why the Shulchan doesn't say that is because if you read the whole, this is halacha ches in the siman. All the other halachas until now told you that, except most of the halachas in this siman told you that those dinim are intertwined. What you could be mafresh from one year on the other, and what could be mitzvah if those go together. Whatever works for one works for the other. So he's talking about in this case, but it really for both parts of it. Okay, now what this din that you can't be mafresh from one year on the other makes probably the most serious, for sure the most serious technical, but probably the most serious issue that there is with using the tevel matzah system. Okay, tevel matzah system on one means you make matzahs that you never mafresh truma from them, you never mafresh challah from them, and then you leave those in the factory, and then you mafresh every day a little bit of that tevel matzah on the batters that are being made. It's a way to do remote Hafrashas challah. So there's halachic issues to them. We've talked about some, and we'll talk about more in the future, but from a technical perspective, it causes the most issues. And I'm going to explain to you a little bit about what the shayla is, and then a possible way to get around it, if I could say that. Okay? And then I think this. In the United States, we break up the wheat that we have into two types. Okay? We have winter wheat and spring wheat. Okay? If you look here on the screen, you see this, according to I forgot who, there's 11 ways to divide up how wheat grows, 11 stages that it goes through. Okay, there's different ways to break it up. It's not important for us. And the way it works is as follows. Winter wheat gets planted in the fall, okay, and it does the beginning of its growth during the fall. Okay, so I called it roughly from Sukkot to Hanukkah. Then when it gets cold outside, it stops. It just stuck in what they call the tillering stage. Okay, it gets stuck there someplace. Whenever it gets too cold, it stops growing and it stays put as is. And then,
exposed during the winter?
Correct. And then when it gets warm again, it starts to grow again. It'll start growing again. I will Purim to Shavuos time. We'll see some more exact numbers, dates a little later. It starts growing again, and it grows until Shavuos time, and then in the summer it gets harvested. Okay, and as opposed to the other kind of wheat.
Is that over the summer?
Yeah, it's harvested in the early summer. Okay, we're going to talk about the dates in a second. I'm going to talk to you about the dates in a second. Right now, I wrote Shavuos, okay? But we're going to talk about the exact dates that there are in a second. We'll get to the gory details in a second, okay? Spring wheat, okay, there are really more types. We're calling them winter and spring wheat. Spring wheat doesn't get planted until the spring, okay? And it gets planted roughly Pesach time, and it doesn't get fully grown all the way till deeper into the summer. I wrote here Tisha B'Av. Okay, those the dates are not exact, obviously. Okay, so most definitely the bulk of their growth happens in the spring, in the warm weather. But the winter wheat gets planted before the winter, starts to grow a little bit, stays dormant for the whole winter, and then continues on.
You can't have one field with both.
No, you can't have one field with both. So but you see,
When's the spring you get harvested?
we're going to talk about the spring in the summer. Okay?
Harvested in the summer.
Well, it goes till the Aruch Tisha B'Av. I'm going to talk to you about in a second about when they get harvested. Not so much about the spring, more about the winter. But why it gets harvested?
Every farmer has 2 harvests. Are you telling me it's not true?
Not for wheat. No, you can't do that. It's one or the other. Okay, so now, but just for, this has nothing to do with what we're talking about today. But what you see here makes it pretty clear why it is that winter wheat is always yashan. Because winter wheat is planted in the winter. Okay, it's planted well before Pesach. It doesn't get harvested till after Pesach. So it's always yashan because by the time you get harvested, it's already, at least in the United States, it's always yashan. But Chullah, it's always yashan because it's planted before Pesach and harvested after, as opposed to the spring wheat, it's planted right around Pesach time, depending on the year, and that's why it's potentially not yashan. Okay.
The Torah knows about winter wheat. It speaks about winter wheat, right?
The way things go in Eretz Yisrael is not like this. Okay, right?
Like what?
Doesn't go in these on this kind of a schedule like we have over here.
Which one, winter or spring?
I don't know how their spring wheat
I
goes.
don't either.
I'm not. The thing is like this: our wheat stops growing in the winter because it gets too cold. I don't know if it gets that cold in Eretz Yisrael to stop the growth. Ours stops dead in its tracks.
Kind of cuts it, right? Isn't it?
No, we actually for wheat that's true. So it's more like winter wheat.
So
Maybe.
it's like,
I don't really know. It's not a problem. Yes, Eretz Yisrael. We got to deal with us. Okay, so what happens like this? So it comes out that both of these types of wheat, if these were planted in Tafshin Ayin Hay, okay, in the Tafshin Ayin Hay wheat, the spring wheat, the winter wheat was harvested in the beginning of the summer. We'll talk more in a second when it was harvested. The spring wheat is being harvested right now. Okay, it'll be harvested later in the summer, and it comes to the mills who start to use it. So that means this Tafshin Ayin Hay wheat is already being used in the summertime and starts from then on. Which means but the tevel matzahs are not there yet. Okay, the tevel matzahs of Tafshin Ayin Hay wheat haven't shown up yet. They're not going to show up for a while. It's going to be a few months. I'll tell you in a second what it is. It takes a while until the tevel matzahs actually make it into the factory. So what's going on is that today there are people using Tafshin Ayin Hay winter wheat. Okay, there will soon be people even using Tafshin Ayin Hay spring wheat. It's already starting. Those people who want to be mafresh challah with this tevel matzah system are being mafresh challah with tevel matzahs with Tafshin Ayin Daled. Okay, the wheat that they have is the matzahs that were made almost a year ago from wheat that was harvested that was from Tafshin Ayin Daled wheat. So they're using that. They want to use that to be mafresh challah. Okay, well you can't do that. You can't be mafresh challah from one year on the next year. So they have every year. This is an every single year problem that for a couple of months in the summer, towards the end of the summer, they only have tevel matzahs from the old wheat, and they're already using the new wheat. Okay, that's in a nutshell what the problem is. We can talk about some details now, but that's the issue that there is. It's a very, very serious practical issue. Okay, we're not talking about halachos whether you could use the tevel matzah system. It's practically you have the wrong year's produce. You can't be mafresh from one or the other.
So the problem is with the winter wheat.
It's primarily a problem with the winter wheat. Okay? It's primarily a problem with the winter wheat. The spring wheat tends to come to the bakeries around the time when they're getting the tevel matzahs, but not dafka.
You could get winter wheat from the new year and use it for the spring wheat from this year.
Yeah, but I'm saying the spring wheat is already starting to come to some bakeries already. The tevel matzahs haven't shown up yet. But the difference between when the spring wheat shows up, the spring wheat comes to the bakeries closer to when they get the tevel matzahs. Before. But the winter wheat comes considerably before. I'm going to tell you in a second. Give me a second. Give me a second. I'm going to explain to you why. But that's the lamaisa is that they're not making it. Okay? So now, let's look at some dates for when things grow. Okay? Now what it is like this. We're going to see information here mainly from one part of the USDA. Okay? Baruch Hashem, our government has tracked a million things, okay? And they have a report that explain. They actually have reports week by week of how much is harvested in every state from every state of every crop. What I'm going to show you now is not based on that. I actually have the data. I didn't finish the slide set, so I'm not showing you that. But this is based on a different report the government gives of the Aruch on a regular year. When does each state harvest? Okay, that's what I'm giving to you. And I didn't do it for every state because some of them are silly. They harvest nothing. What you're going to see here is for the states that produce the main ones you're going to see are 60% of U.S. production, and then actually expanded to like 75%. Okay, when do these people usually harvest? Now the way it works is like this: the winter wheat, everyone plants it in the fall. When does it start growing again? When it gets warm. So what happens is, whoever gets warm weather first, their winter wheat starts growing first. Okay, so the southern states their winter wheat starts regrowing faster than the northern states. Okay, so the winter wheat in the south is growing earlier than as you go further north into colder climates. Second of all, well, sort of related to that is that the people in the southern states grow most of the winter wheat in the United States. They do most of the growing. It sort of goes together, but they do that, as opposed to the spring wheat grows in the northern states, like North Dakota and Montana. Like those are the colder places. They grow spring wheat. The winter wheat grows in the southern states. You'll see in a second. It grows more in the southern states because their climate is more appropriate for it. Okay, so now, the three states that make the most. Okay, I'll leave that for you. Okay, so here's what it looks like. This is for a standard year. This is not Dafka for this year. Okay, this is for a standard year. Okay, if you look here, I didn't realize it's going so fast by itself. Okay, I didn't realize it was going by itself. You're looking here at the states that make the bulk, the 60% of the wheat that's made, and you see as Texas. Okay, I forget all my states over here. Texas, Oklahoma. These states on the bottom that are the warmest, are producing themselves between them an awful lot of the wheat. Move up a few more states between these bunch of states over here. These group of states over here, we have, you could count up the numbers. That'll do the math for us. But the bulk of this stuff is being harvested in the end of June, into July, the middle of July, which is to say that but as we move to the middle of the summer, this stuff is all. We lost something. What happened? Oh, no, wait, that's all right. I'm sorry. Okay. Here, I filled in another few states without their percentage. These states over here in the southeast, these ones make a smaller percentage, but you see how the colors go. You see how the colors go, that the people in the south, their stuff comes harvested earlier. In the end of June, they're already harvesting. They're already finishing their harvest in the end of June. I have the numbers for this year. I'm sorry, it didn't make it into a slide. But what goes on in the warmer states, it ripens faster. Well, that makes sense. Now,
what are the dark gray states?
They're nothing. They're just blank. I didn't fill in information. Each of those states makes tiny amounts of the crop. I just didn't bother doing all the coloring. Okay. So now that's how it's produced. Now how do you make tevel matzahs? How do you make tevel matzahs? They go to a bakery. They go to a matzah baker and they say, "Mr. Matzah Bakery, please make me matzahs that are tevel." Okay. There's 4 reasons why the winter wheat comes to market long before the tevel matzahs. So it's sort of built into the system. It's not by anybody's fault. It's like built into the system. And the reason are as follows. First of all, as you see, the winter wheat that grows first is in the southern states. Okay, well, guess what? There are no matzah bakeries in Arkansas. Okay, the matzah bakeries are in the northeast. Okay, so the natural place for the matzah bakery to get winter wheat from is from somebody local their wheat comes to market so much later. So it's sort of built in that there's. I didn't say they can't, but it's built in. It's built in that they're automatically their mindset is to have wheat that comes a little bit later because that's the whole mindset is we don't get.
The rest of the bakeries are also not using it.
Right, but if there's a bakery in Dallas that's owned by a Yid, he's getting wheat from nearby. The tevel matzah is not going to be. The tevel matzah said we're waiting for the wheat didn't show up yet. Okay, that's one thing. Second is when a mill grinds their flour, they send it to different people. First goes to you, and then to you, and then to you. Okay, well, the matzah bakery, La Dafka, is the first customer. Okay, I don't know how they decide who gets first and who gets second, but in order for the matzah bakery to have their tevel matzah ready, they would have to be the very first one to get the new winter wheat. If on Monday, the first truck goes out to this company, and on Tuesday it goes to the matzah bakery, well, the matzah bakery is already a day behind. Okay, but they may not be the first or second or third, they may be the 10th. Okay, that's the second reason. Okay, now, more to the mice of how you make matzah this is how matzah bakeries work. Machine matzah bakeries. They make their Pesach matzahs during the winter, and get ready for Pesach. For months and months, they make matzah. Come around Pesach time, they start making chametz matzah. Okay, they start making matzah for Pesach. They start making chametz matzah and crackers and all kinds of other things that they make that belong on that line that are chametz. Then they finish that in the summer. Comes the summer, they close the factory. Okay? It's time to do maintenance, give everybody a vacation, and then they kasher the factory back again. And then comes again the fall, and they start again making Pesach matzah. They start making matzah for Pesach. That's a schedule in a matzah bakery. Okay, so that means they're not even if the first flour was ready at the end of June, they're not ready to make matzah at the end of June. Okay, that's not where they're holding it. They're not ready to make the tevel matzah until the fall. In fact, this year the tevel matzah is going to be made. We're on the right day. It's being made. The schedule is to make it on Tzom Gedaya. Someone told me it's the day afterwards. Okay, it's being made on Tzom Gedaya. This year it's September 16th, in a few days from now. September 16th. So that means that there was winter wheat that was harvested at the end of June. The matzah bakery didn't get around to finishing what they had to do in Kashrus until now, and Tzom Gedaya, right? It's Rosh Hashanah. They're going to start making the tevel matzahs. Okay, so that means that since the end of June, there was harvested already other winter wheat, and now we're waiting. It's going to be September before they start baking the tevel matzahs.
So you don't get to ride. When do you get to ride?
Okay, we'll talk about that next time. Okay, hold that information. That's the second part we're going to talk about. And the last piece is that even the day, let's say on Tzom Gedaya, they go ahead and make the tevel matzahs. Either Tzom Gedaya or the next day, they bake the tevel matzahs. Okay, that's not the end of the story. Those tevel matzahs have to actually make it to the factories. The mashgiach's got to stand there and say the whole special nusach and get it started again, that these tevel matzahs should be used for Hafrashas. Well, guess what? Between Tzom Gedaya until that's going to happen, it's not going to happen the next day. There's going to be, we know there's going to be because of all the Yom Tovim. It has to get shipped to the OU office, and then it has to get from the OU office out to all the people. Then you got a mashgiach, you got to go out there and say the whole nusach. So we're delaying ourselves further to the lamaisa is, it's not going to be October or November until that tevel matzah shows up. Okay? So because of these four reasons, the matzah is inherently not going to make it there in time. The first people are already baking, the first harvesting is happening at the end of June, and people are not getting tevel matzahs for months and months later on. Okay? Now, realize, all of this is only for people who use tevel matzah. If you use good old-fashioned Hafrashas Challah in your house, you make a batter, whatever's in the bake, you make the flour, you pull it off. Okay, you Hafrashas Challah, you just take it the way it is. Okay, if you do the way we try to do, which is to use tevel dough, not tevel matzah. Tevel dough means, as you say, is you go to the bakery and say, bakery, I need to know when you're getting in the new flour. They always do. They know it. It's important to them. It's a significant change. So if the mashgiach remembers, he goes to the bakery and says, bakery, I need to know when you're getting the new winter wheat, and then I need to know again when you're getting the new spring wheat. And when you do that, we're going to make a batter made up of that stuff, and then we'll be mafred by ourselves.
Most bakers have no idea.
Most bakers have no idea? Okay. Maybe. That's not my experience, but I guess you know more than I do about bakeries. But
well, they get different kinds of flour. So this factory has this factory.
That's true. But it is an event in particular about spring flour, because the protein level is very significant. So this year's grain went 12%, and next year's went 12.5%. So that makes a difference in a bakery, and they should know. Okay. My question was that they know. Okay. So now, the third issue that I told you, which was that the matzah bakery doesn't get around to doing matzah until Tzom Gedaya. So they had an eitzah. They said, okay, we'll find a little bakery. We'll make crackers. We'll make a little special production of crackers. It only dealt with the third issue. The first, second, and fourth, it didn't help. They made a special little batch of crackers that were going to be tevel in some little bakery, not a real matzah bakery. It's a bakery. What?
I found a bakery in the town.
So they actually didn't. The bakery was not in the south; it was in the northeast. And also, once they made these special crackers, they said, to send until the factories and tell the mashgiachim to make the whole nusach. It wasn't worth it. They just left them in the office, and they were mafresh loim and mukaf, which is not very good either. Okay, we'll talk about that one day. Why that's really not so great. They said, it works good, but it's not really very great.
It has to be kosher Pesach without it?
It doesn't have to be, but they want it to be kosher Pesach, but then it could last. Remember, this is going to a Jewish-owned company, so they want it to be kosher Pesach.
They want to use matzah because you could leave them around.
Right. Well, he's saying, why can't you use chametz matzahs? Okay, but well, then you have to remember Challah. Okay, we want to talk about. Okay, so now, because of, I forgot to say one thing. I'm sorry. Next little pictures. I'm sorry. There is, when we say that things are harvested at the end of June, that doesn't mean that the day they harvest it, someone's using it. Okay, there's really a couple of stages that happen. Okay, first, you have to harvest grain. Okay, you have to harvest it. Then the next thing is it has to sweat. Okay, I don't know what that means, but they said it has something to do with, that's the people from the mill told me, it has something to do with the moisture level getting right before they're ready to mill. They don't mill it right away when it shows up. It takes a few weeks till it sweats and they're ready.
Is there moisture on it? Is that Shalach chimutz?
I don't know. I didn't think about that question. I think they mean moisture within the grain itself. I'm not sure. Then they mill it, and then it's got to be delivered. Okay, then it's got to go off to the company. So there is a delay. Okay, but for example, I'll give you an example. We have a hashgach on a company in Michigan, Where's my paper? We're a hashgacha company in Michigan. Okay, Michigan is one of the later states. It's pretty cold in Michigan. Okay, I forgot. Okay, Michigan's harvest didn't start until July 16th. Okay, that's what they told me. They didn't start. Basically, they weren't really started until July 16th of this year. That's what the people in the mill told me. He said, and by the beginning of September, some of the mills were already producing 100% new wheat. That's what they were selling to their customers. Okay? So that's like
do it in the summer wheat.
Winter wheat. So July 16th is when the harvest began. I'm not talking about that it was finished. The harvest began. So let's say the harvest was finishing up by the beginning of August, the middle of August, and then it took there was a little delay for all these couple of steps over here. So, by September 1st, there was some of the mills that worked for this company were providing 100% new winter wheat. Okay, so that means so there's a delay. There's a certain amount of delay from the harvest, a couple of weeks, but it's very possible that once the harvest happens, so pick your day when you want your harvest to happen. If your harvest happens in the middle of July, then, see, back in here, you see they're called Michigan. At the end of July. I didn't realize I had it on the picture there. Okay, which is what she said. It started really in July 16th, and I guess it was finishing at the end of July. And then a month later, it was already, people were using that.
So typically, a bakery in a state uses flour from mills from its own state.
Local, I don't know, its own state. I don't think that it goes by state line, but roughly by locally. It roughly works by locally. Just it's logistically. It's
not like stuff that gets shipped.
Of course it does. But I'm saying it's a logistical thing that things go roughly by where they are. No, but it's not 100%. You're right. A place in Dallas could be getting wheat from Montana, but what's the sense? All the wheat grows in the South. Look at the numbers here. Why would I go to Washington State?
That place in Texas getting cream from California.
Okay, I didn't say this. No, I didn't. By no means. By no. Okay, so now, what happened is, I'm going to leave this picture up here. Okay, that's my last picture to show you guys. You just see. Pay up the numbers. So, this is a very serious issue. Okay, and it's the reason why. It's the practical reason why lots of people. Well, there are people who don't want to use tevel matzah. Okay, so came along. Rebelsky came and had an idea. He had a real chiddush, two chiddushim together, to say why it's not as big as you think. Okay, now you'll hear that there's a lot of questions on what he had to say. And Rabbi Schachter wrote to that. He says, "Kedai hu yidideni Rabbi Yisrael Belsky lismach lav akol panam b'chaz chutz la'aretz b'shas adcha." Okay, that's what he wrote. So he's like, what are we going to do? So we're sort of stuck. So do whatever we can, or we'll be samachan b'shas adcha. Okay, so like this. I said to you at the beginning that the reason why you can't be mafresh challah, you can't be mafresh challah from one year's produce on another. What's the reason? It's because when just like truma. Challah is called truma in the Torah. Just like truma, you can't be mafresh one year on the other, so too challah. Okay, well, there's a question on that. Challah is really different than truma and meiser. And the difference is like this. When something grows, let's say wheat grows, it's chayiv in truma or meiser very much depends on what it grew. Basically, it's chayiv as soon as it grows. Not exactly, but basically it's chayiv when it grows. So we say the year that it grew in is the year that it's chayiv in challah. So we could say, don't be marvelous from this year's on the next year's or on last year's. But challah is different from that. I'm sorry, when I say the marvelous truma. But in truma, challah is different than that. That when wheat grows, it's not chayiv in Hafrashas challah. You only chayiv in Hafrashas challah when you make a batter out of it. So there's a logic that says, maybe the din of Mishon al Chaverta from being marvelous from one year on the other is different for challah and everything else. It's true that challah is called truma, but truma and meisers depend on when things grow, because when they grow, they become chayiv in truma and meisers. But when they grow, they don't become chayiv in challah. Grains of wheat that grow aren't chayiv in challah until you make batters out of them. So maybe the din of Mishon al Chaverta either shouldn't apply, or maybe it should apply when you make the batter. Okay, we should make up a new din. Mishana Chaverta should depend on when you make the batter. Okay? Now, that in itself will be its own complication. And then we'd sit there, on Shem Gedalia, instead of baking tevel matzahs, we'd be running around, switching everybody's tevel around. Okay, but of course not the din. Okay, but the question, maybe it's possible, should we consider that maybe the din of Mishana Chaverta shouldn't apply to Challah, because the year of when it grew doesn't really make a difference. There is a makar to say that midaraisa is really no problem to be mafresh from one year on the next. Okay, even though I told you that you're not allowed to be mafresh, there is a little basis there is a reason to think that you're allowed to be, and that's as follows. What we have in our din here, that Kashrus Chadasha and Kashrus Yishana, that's a Mishnah, and the Yishana is a Kashrus on that Mishnah. Okay, I'm going to tell you now the Yishana is Kashrus on that Mishnah. The Mishnah said that they're not matzurif. If you have a less than a share of 1 year and less than a share of another year touching each other, they're not matzurif to one another. In fact, you tell me, wait a second. Don't you remember we said that if you have different grains that cannot be matzurif, they're not the times that, let's say, wheat and spelt. Wheat and spelt are climbs that they can't be matzurif to one another. But there's a special din by Challah. It says in Torah, Arisa Sechem. Arisa Sechem teaches us that if the batters look alike, they can be mitzorif. Even though the din is, even though the climbs that they can't really be mitzorif, if they don't have a shear, then there's a secondary way to be mitzorif. If you weren't expecting the earlier din, there's a secondary way to be mitzorif called Arisa Sechem. They can be mitzorif because they look alike. So, Fek Yerushalmi, if wheat and spelt, which are climbs they're really not allowed to be mitzorif. But they can be mitzurif if they don't have a shear. If you won't have a shear with that, you could be mitzurif because they look alike. You tell me, wheat from this year and wheat from last year, they for sure look alike. It's the same thing. Wheat and wheat, it's the same thing. So if you're going to say that wheat and spelt could be mitzurif, then of course wheat and wheat can be mitzurif. So how could the Mishnah say that wheat from this year is not mitzurif with wheat from last year? Why are you saying that? It should be mitzurif after the din of Barisa Sechem. It's not mitzurif on the, so to speak, the first pass, but the second pass should tell us that it's mitzurif because they look alike. Okay, that's your Shaman's kasha. Shalmi says, you're right. It's true. Really, midoraisa they could be mitzurif. But midorabanan they're not mitzurif. Midoraisa they'd be mitzurif just like wheat and spelt. Midorabanan they're not mitzurif. Why? Hu savar loymar. People who see you being marfish from this battle will think it'll confuse people. People will see that you put 1 year, 2 years produce together and you mitzaref them, and you all of a sudden you could be marfish from one or the other. They'll think, you could be marfish truma mice like that also. That's too confusing for people. So the Chum said midrabanan, you're not allowed to assume they're mitzuref because it'll confuse people that truma mice. That's what the Yerushalmi says. Okay. So that is to say, if you look in the poskim here on this din, midoraisa really the Kashrus Tzvu Chadasha, the Kashrus Tzvu Yishana, midoraisa is mitzuref. And that has nafkaminas to it. Midrabanan is not mitzuref. People will say, Afu Sarvalim, people will say, Shetermin Ma'asmi Zazah. So, Rabowski says, you know what Yerushalmi just said? Yerushalmi just turned over the whole din. And it said, you thought, when you opened up the Mishnah, you thought that there's such a din, Mishal Al Chaverta, Midraisa, by Challah, just like by all of the Chumas. It's a mistake. There's no such din b'chlal midoraisa. There's no din in Mishana Chaverta. The whole thing is a big mistake. Because, like I said beforehand, there's no problem in Mishana Chaverta because it has to do with when you made the batter. It has to do with it doesn't make a difference when it grew. So why are you now doing Mishana Chaverta? Why do we always know that now it's a mission now to do it? That's all midrabanan. The whole din is a din drabanan. Midoraisa, the whole thing, there's no issue to be mafish from one year on the other one. The whole thing is a din drabanan. Okay, that's part one of what Rebels gets to say. I'm going to get back to that in a second, whether if we think that we understand that or we don't understand it. But the first part is, he says, when Yerushalmi says, Af Hu Sarva Loimer, in other words, it's a din drabanan, it means it's always a din drabanan. The whole din of Termin Masim Yizal is a whole din drabanan. That's part one. It's also drabanan. For Challah. Only for Challah, not for Chumash Meiser. But because there's a confusion, only for Challah. No, so, okay. There's no kula. The person can speak out. Where at least through kula, you have to be machmir on it, even though it doesn't say it in the Mishnah. Okay, you have to deal with the rice like this. But okay. Now, part two of it, what he has to say is, he says, so the whole chashash of afu savalam determined ma'asrim, that only applies in Eretz Yisrael, because in Eretz Yisrael they take trumas and meiser. But you live in Chicago. What's the problem? Who's going to worry about being mafish? Who's going to learn from here? You can be mafish trumas and meiser from 1 year on the next. Nah, no one's going to learn that. That's Eretz Yisrael big a problem. It's not a chutzar big a problem. So Mamela, the Yerushalmi tells us the whole din of Mishana Chaverta B'Challah, that's a din midrabanan. It's not din deraisa. Well, if it's only din derabanan, that din derabanan doesn't apply in chutzar. It's only for Challah Eretz Yisrael, where there's a problem with trumas and meisers. But in chutzar it doesn't apply, and therefore we don't have to worry about Mishana Chaverta in chutzar. B'Challah we don't have to worry about it. Okay, so the second part, we're going to go out of order. The second thing that he said is amazingly unbelievable. I mean, it's like to think that the din is that Mishana Chaverta doesn't apply in chutzar, and nobody until now, this is actually one person says it, but nobody until now woke up to say that. What happened? It says in Shulchan Aruch, Kashrus Chadasha, and no one says, but in chutzar doesn't apply. Where is everybody saying? I mean, everybody lives in the chutzar. Lots of people live in the chutzar. Where is everyone saying this whole cheshbon?
This is a bush in Shulchan Aruch, nobody says it.
Why? Of course, yes. Nobody. Where's everybody? Yes.
Yeah, there's some. Correct.
I didn't say there is nobody, but basically there's nobody. You open up the book over here, you look at it, no one says that, no one's talking about it. It's Challah L'aretz, right? No one's saying anything like that. No one do it. So this second half of the Chiddush is truly hard to imagine. I mean, how can you say that the din is that this whole thing doesn't apply to Chutz La'aretz, and nobody knew about it? Okay, it was a secret until we ran into this problem with tevel matzah. Nobody knew about it. Okay, so because that's the second part. That's mamish like hard to get. But the first part. Let's go back to the first part. What did Rebelsky say? When the Gemara said, Hafrashas, it really needs to say is, the whole din is a din drabanan that you can't be mafresh Challah from one year to the next. Now, that's not the way most people would have read Yerushalmi. Again, the Yerushalmi said is, the regular din of Tiruf says, Mishana Chavertit, obviously came to the Midaraisa. In fact, Yerushalmi, but off the second way to be mafresh, when there's not a shear, then you should be allowed to be mafresh, because just like wheat and spelt on the when they're not supposed to be, so too this year's and last year. And to that second question, we say you're right. Aruch would apply from one year on the next year. But the din of the regular din, when you have a shear challah, no one said when you had a shear challah that it should work with the raisa. It's only when you didn't have a shear challah that the rules are more flexible when you don't have a shear challah. So when you have a shear challah from each part, no one said that. Yerushalmi didn't say that. Yerushalmi did back with the regular din the raisa. The whole Yerushalmi is talking about when you have the second in a risa sechem. So now, when we're talking about using tevel matzahs, we're talking about that each batter has a shear challah. The batter in the bakery has a shear challah. That's why they're being mafresh challah. The tevel matzahs has a shear challah. That's why the tevel matzahs. So when there's a shear challah, there's no reason to think that doesn't work. That would work with the raisa. The whole clear of the Yerushalmi was now that you can't work with the raisa from the regular tziruf, but there's a secondary way to be mitzvah, which is called a risa sechem. That works. That's really flexible. It's all kinds of things to be mitzvah. So how about mishana chaverta? Okay, you're right. That would work mishana chaverta. But to say that the regular thing, why would anybody think that? Sure, it doesn't work from one year to the next. So now, Rebelsky has a little riot what he has to say. The riot is from the Tosfos. That the Gemara says like this. The Gemara says that the din is that challah that's tamei, you can't burn it on. Challah that would be tamei, you wouldn't be allowed. There's a problem. Challah that's tamei you're supposed to burn. If it's Shemitah, our last chance to talk about Shemitah, it's almost the end. If it would become tamei, you're supposed to burn it. Well, what happens if you have challah during Shemitah? You can't burn the challah that's tamei during Shemitah. So the Yerushalmi, the Gemara, it's Gemara in Kashrus. The Gemara says, well, maybe it's impossible to be mafresh challah on. You shouldn't be mechuyev to be mafresh challah on Shemitah because it's not possible because it might become tamei and then you'd have to burn it, which you wouldn't be allowed to. Okay, but the Gemara's question is not so important to us. What the details are, but the point that the Gemara makes is there would be no way to be mafresh challah on Shemitah because you may have to burn it and you wouldn't be allowed to. In fact, Tosfos, I don't know what you mean. I could be mafresh challah on Shemitah. What's the problem? So Tosfos, we could say is, and give you the words. So, in fact, Yochel Hafish me'is acheres she'ena shel shvius al zayis. I understand. I made a batter in Shemitah with Shemitah wheat. I'll be mafresh from a batter that's ena shel Shemitah. I'm mafresh from a batter that's ena shel Shemitah, and I can be mafresh from that on this. And that stuff doesn't have kedusha shvius. There's nothing wrong with burning that stuff. So what does this mean when he said I'll be mafresh from a batter she'ena shel Shemitah, she'ena shel shvius on this one? Me'is acheres. What do you mean? I'll be mafresh from is acheres. So Rebelsky says what he means is I'll take fruits from the 6th year. Okay, we're talking here on the rice level. The whole Gemara is on the rice and not the Rabban level. So the Gemara means Tosfos means it's easy to be mafresh. Take wheat from the 6th year, make up a batter, and be mafresh on this, and there won't be a problem with kedusha shvius. Okay, and in fact, the Turi Evan, when he brings this Tosfos like sort of in passing, understands it that way. Okay, that what Tosfos means is be mafresh from a different batter. He means it's from a different batter from a different year. So Rebelsky says, see, because there's nothing wrong with the rice of being mafresh from one year on the other one. But the other poskim don't accept that reading of Tosfos. Okay, the Marit Al-Ghazi brings his Tosfos. He says, what is he talking about? He says, what Tosfos is talking about? You're mafresh from a different year? You can't be mafresh from a different year? No such thing. Of course you can't be mafresh from a different year, from one year on another year. That's obvious you can't do that. Marit Al-Ghazi says, no, you're misreading Tosfos. What Tosfos means is when he says, you be mafresh, yochel hafresh me'is acher she'ena shel shvius, he means is, the din is by Challah, that grain from Chutz La'aretz that comes to Eretz Yisrael and you make the batter in Eretz Yisrael, it's chayiv in Challah as if Challah is Eretz Yisrael. It's not Challah Chutz La'aretz. He says, so if you bring wheat from Chutz La'aretz to Eretz Yisrael, you can make up a batter in Eretz Yisrael and then you can mafresh from that on this stuff. Okay, it doesn't have to be you can do this every day. It just has to be physically possible. He said you'll take it from Chutz La'aretz. It grew in the same year. It grew in Kansas during Shemitah. You bring it to Eretz Yisrael, and there you make it into flour. So it's Chayav L'Challah Eretz Yisrael. And they're both 7th year produce. One has Kedusha Shvias and one doesn't. So when Tyson said, Yachol Havash Me'is Acher She'ena Shel Shvias, he was particular. He wasn't She'ena Shel Shana Zu. He means She'ena Shel Shvias. It's from this year. Just it didn't grow during Shemitah. It didn't have Kedusha Shvias to it because it grew in Kansas. Okay. That's what That's what Tysus must mean. And there are others that give other similar answers. Could have grown from places in Eretz Yisrael that belong to Goyim. Okay? They have Kedusha Shvias. It could have grown, the rules for what's the 7th year for Shemitah and what's the 7th year for Challah are almost the same, but not exactly the same. It's possible that a grain could grow in the 7th year and be a 7th year for Challah, but not a 7th year for Shemitah. So, or the other way around. It's possible that the same stalk has a din of a 7th year for this and a 6th year for that. So you can get grain that grew in Shemitah that's 7th year Challah-wise, but it's not 7th year Shemitah-wise. Okay? The other answers like that. When Tyson said he didn't mean you could mark from the 6th year on the 7th year. He meant it as the 7th year on the 7th year. But there are heckentenses of how you can get produce of the 7th year that doesn't have Kedusha Shvias, you can mark on this. Okay? So, just to summarize. Now I'll be mafresh from one year to the next. Basically everyone agrees that. You can't mafresh Challah from one year, it's a mission, you can't mafresh Challah from one year's produce on another year's produce. It inherently causes a problem for people who want to use the tevel matzah system because the New Year's grain, the Tafshin Ein Hey grain, is already in the market. It came already starting from the end of June, beginning of July. It's starting to come to the market. It hit 50%, to Lynn, your question, this year it hit 50% about July 4th. Okay? By July 4th, about half of the stuff was from the new year, and yet the tevel matzahs are not going to be coming to bakeries, obviously not until the middle of September because it hasn't even been made yet, but probably realistically not till the middle of October or until November. So we have an automatic break of months when we don't have the right year's produce, we don't have the right shana to be mafresh. So we want to use this system. Okay? The same thing applies on a smaller scale to the spring wheat, but it's more of an issue for the winter wheat. It's a longer stretch of time. So Rabowski had this two-part finish, both of which we had a hard time understanding. And again, because of this, seriously doesn't use this. And we don't use the system because this is a technical problem that we don't feel comfortable using the system, which leaves us hanging basically high and dry for a couple months a year.